The warship drifted along the edge of the system like a blade held to a throat, its hull glowing with cold alien runes. Inside its gravity wells hummed with judgment older than stars, and in the center chamber a young alien woman stood bound in shimmering restraints, her breath shallow, her eyes fixed on the endless black beyond the viewport. She was a princess by blood and history, but here she was nothing more than a body awaiting sentence. She could still feel the echo of her refusal, the moment her voice had not shaken, when she had looked at the captain of the warship, tall and revered, wrapped in symbols of authority, and said no, not with anger or insult, but with dignity. That single word had rippled through the command deck like a shockwave, because alien law did not allow refusal, not from one of her lineage, not when a captain claimed her as reward for service in battle. The law was ancient, written during eras when survival demanded obedience. When destiny was assigned, not chosen, refusal was treason, and treason demanded the void, a punishment designed not just to kill, but to erase, no grave, no memory, only silence. Now the air around her shimmered as the restraints tightened slightly, reacting to her rising pulse. She felt fear, sharp and cold, but beneath it burned something stronger, pride, sorrow, and a quiet rage at a universe that demanded her body in exchange for peace. She wondered if her ancestors watched, if they regretted the laws they had carved into stone and code. Across the ship, far from the execution chamber, a human sat strapped into a pilot harness, hands resting lightly on controls that responded more to instinct than touch. His name was Elias, a human soldier assigned as auxiliary pilot after the last joint battle. Humans were new to this alliance, respected for their ferocity in war, distrusted for their unpredictability in peace. Elias had learned the rules quickly, or so they thought, but humans did not just learn rules, they weighed them, tested them against something older and harder to name, conscience. He had seen the princess earlier, escorted through the corridors, her head high despite the chains. Their eyes had met for only a breath, but in that moment he had seen not alien royalty, but a woman being marched toward injustice. The ship shuddered softly as it aligned with the execution vector, stars stretching thin outside the forward view. Elias felt it through the frame, through his bones, a familiar sensation, the moment before something irreversible. His comm panel flickered with routine confirmations, execution sequence greenlit, captain authority verified, law upheld. His jaw tightened, memories flooding back, of worlds burned because no one broke the rules, of orders followed too well, of faces he could not forget. Humans had learned survival through defiance, progress through rebellion, and meaning through choosing to act when silence was easier. In the chamber, the princess was guided forward. The floor beneath her feet dissolved into transparent force, revealing the infinite dark below. The void waited, silent and patient. She closed her eyes, not in surrender, but to remember warmth, sunlight, the sound of laughter before duty had claimed her life. A countdown pulsed through the ship, slow and ceremonial, each beat echoing like a drum of fate. Elias moved before he fully decided. His fingers danced across controls, rerouting power, disengaging safeties coded in a language not meant for human hands. Alarms whispered first, uncertain, as if the ship itself could not believe what it sensed. On the command deck, the captain turned sharply, his crest flaring in shock. Unauthorized control input, human pilot, stand down. His voice carried authority sharpened by outrage. Elias did not respond. His heart thundered, sweat slicked his palms, but his eyes were clear. He pushed the thrusters, not toward escape, but toward the execution axis, placing his fighter directly between the warship and the void aperture. In the chamber, the restraints flickered. The princess felt it, a disruption, a tremor of possibility. She opened her eyes just as the stars shifted, something massive blocking the darkness. Her breath caught as she saw the unmistakable silhouette of a human craft, small, defiant, impossibly fragile against the warship. Gasps rippled through the crew, confusion turning to fury. Battle stations were called. Weapons systems awakened. Alien officers shouted about law and order, about precedent and punishment. Elias finally spoke, his voice steady despite the storm he had unleashed. You call this justice, he said. You call this destiny. Where I come from, destiny is something you fight for, and law that kills the innocent deserves to be broken. The princess felt something crack open inside her chest, hope painful and bright. She pressed her bound hands against the field, tears blurring her vision, not from fear now, but from the sudden, terrifying idea. that she might live. The captain stared at the human craft, then at the execution chamber, rage warring with calculation. The Alliance trembled on the edge of collapse, battle hung seconds away, and yet the warship hesitated, caught between ancient law and an unexpected truth. For the first time since her sentence was spoken, the void did not feel inevitable. Fate itself seemed to pause, waiting to see what a single human would dare to do next. The warship did not fire immediately, and in that hesitation the entire galaxy seemed to lean forward, weapons primed but silent, lights along the hull shifting from ceremonial blue to warning crimson. The captain's claws dug into the command throne as centuries of law screamed for obedience, while the presence of the human craft screamed defiance. Elias hovered there, engines burning hot, his fighter trembling as targeting locks brushed against his hull like cold fingers. He could feel the weight of thousands of lives balanced on his next breath. Humans had fought entire wars for less, and lost them too. But this was different. This was a single life, a single choice, and somehow it felt heavier than any battlefield. Inside the execution chamber, the princess felt the restraints loosen slightly, not enough to free her, but enough to remind her that systems were no longer fully obeying the captain's will. Her pulse raced, each heartbeat a drum of fear and fragile hope. She stared at the human craft as if it were a myth given metal and fire, wondering what kind of species raised pilots willing to stand alone against a warship. The captain's voice cut through the ship, controlled but edged with fury. Human pilot, withdraw immediately. You are violating interstellar law, alliance treaty, and battle protocol. Stand down or be destroyed. His gaze flicked briefly toward the chamber, calculating, measuring the cost of blood against the cost of precedent. Elias swallowed, memories of training halls and quiet nights on ruined worlds pressing against his chest. He keyed his mic again. You call her property of victory, he said softly, but she is alive, she chose, and you decided that choice was a crime. If this is the law we're defending, then maybe the Alliance deserves to break. The words rippled through the command deck. Some officers stiffened in outrage, others shifted uncomfortably, their eyes avoiding the execution feed, because even among those raised on obedience, doubt could still take root. The princess felt tears spill freely now, streaking down skin marked by royal sigils. No one had ever spoken for her like that. Not her advisors, not her family, not even herself. Her culture taught grace and submission, strength in silence. But this human spoke as if her will mattered, as if the universe should bend to protect it. Weapons powered fully, plasma veins glowing along the warship's flanks. The hum of energy grew deeper, more menacing. Alarms escalated from warning to threat. Battle was seconds away, and the smallest miscalculation would turn Elias into drifting debris. Deep within the warship systems, ancient algorithms argued with emergency overrides, execution protocols demanded completion, but combat risk matrices screamed catastrophe. Firing now could ignite interspecies war, a war humans would not face quietly. The captain raised a hand, halting the final weapons command, not from mercy, but from strategy. His voice returned, colder now, human. You do not understand what you are threatening. This law binds empires. Break it here and you invite chaos across 1,000 systems. Elias let out a breath he did not know he was holding. His reply carried something raw, something earned. Chaos is already here, he said. It's just wearing a uniform. You've taught entire species that their lives are owed to tradition. Humans learned the hard way that tradition can be wrong. The silence that followed was heavier than any explosion. Even the hum of engines seemed to fade. Crew members exchanged glances loaded with fear and possibility, because if this moment passed without blood, nothing would ever be the same again. In the chamber, the princess felt the floor beneath her stabilize, the void no longer pulling at her like a grave. She pressed her forehead to the field, whispering words of gratitude in her own language, prayers she had never believed anyone would answer. Then the warship shook, not from weapons fire, but from internal conflict. A cascade of system alerts rolled across the command deck. Localized override failure, auxiliary craft control breach. The human fighter was being seized by automated defenses. Elias grunted as his controls stiffened, his craft shuddering as if caught in a giant's grip. He clenched his teeth, rerouting power manually, sparks flaring, muscles straining against restraints. His ship screamed in protest, and for a terrifying moment he felt himself slipping, the void yawning open beneath him not as punishment, but as consequence. The princess sensed it instantly, her breath hitching as the human craft faltered. Fear surged hotter than before, because now hope had a face, and losing it would hurt far more than dying alone. On the command deck, an officer spoke hesitantly, "Captain, if we force the seizure, we risk detonating his reactor. Debris impact probability high, chamber breach possible." The captain's eyes flicked back to the princess, then to the human craft, his crest dimmed, uncertainty finally cracking his certainty. The law demanded her death, but the math now demanded restraint. Elias fought the controls, voice strained but unbroken. "You pull me out," he said, "and you make me a martyr. Humans are very good at remembering martyrs." The words landed like a blade because the captain knew they were true, knew that killing this human would ignite battles far beyond this ship, far beyond this moment. Slowly, painfully, the warship's grip eased. The fighter lurched free, drifting but intact. The execution countdown froze, numbers suspended in unreal stillness. In the chamber, the princess collapsed to her knees as the restraints fully disengaged, sobbing as gravity returned. She was not free yet, but she was alive, and in that fragile miracle, destiny itself felt suddenly negotiable. The stillness that followed felt unnatural, as if the universe itself had taken a breath and forgotten how to exhale. The execution timer hung frozen in the air, lights pulsing without purpose, the warship drifting between decision and disaster. And in that suspended moment, tension did not fade, it sharpened. The captain did not lower his gaze, but something behind his eyes shifted, an old certainty cracking under the weight of consequence. He had commanded fleets, crushed rebellions, enforced law across worlds that had never known choice. Yet this single human pilot had forced him into hesitation, a hesitation more dangerous than any enemy fleet. Elias steadied his craft, systems screaming warnings, sweat stinging his eyes. His hands ached from fighting the controls, but he held position, not retreating, not advancing, the most defiant place a soldier could choose. He could feel the warship watching him, weapons ready, judgment waiting. He wondered how many times in alien history someone had stood here and failed. Inside the chamber, the princess pushed herself upright, her legs trembling, her cuffs gone but invisible eyes still upon her. She felt exposed without chains, as if freedom itself were a crime. She looked at the stars through the field and realized how close she had come to being unmade. Her culture taught that the void was purification, a return to cosmic silence. But in that silence there was no memory, no love, no choice. She touched the sigil at her throat, a mark of lineage older than the captain's command, and for the first time she questioned whether heritage was a blessing or a cage. There were stories whispered in forbidden halls, legends of queens who defied destiny and vanished from history, erased not by death but by deliberate forgetting. She had always thought them cautionary tales. Now she wondered if they were warnings to the law itself. The captain's voice returned, quieter, carrying an edge of something Elias did not expect. "Curiosity, human," he said. "Why risk annihilation for one life not your own?" His officer stiffened. This was not a question asked lightly. Elias hesitated, not because he lacked an answer, but because the truth felt heavier than strategy. "Because she didn't choose this," he said finally, his voice rough, "because someone decided her fate without her consent. And where I come from, that's how monsters are made." A murmur rippled through the bridge, some officers recoiling, others listening too closely. The alien alliance prized order above all else, but order without compassion was a blade that cut both ways. The princess felt his words settle inside her like warmth after endless cold. She pressed a hand to the transparent barrier, her reflection staring back, not as a condemned body, but as a woman seen. Her people believed humans were dangerous because they fought without ritual, without restraint. Now she saw another danger, that humans felt too deeply to accept cruelty disguised as law. Deep within the warship, sealed beyond public schematics, something stirred, an ancient core awakened by anomaly, its purpose predating even the law, older than the alliance itself. Monitors flickered with symbols no living officer could fully translate. The ship was not just metal and code. It was a relic, built around a consciousness designed to preserve stability at any cost. The core evaluated the moment, weighing probabilities not just of battle but of belief. It had seen empires rise and fall, had learned that rigid systems eventually shattered under the pressure of change. The presence of the human pilot introduced variables long suppressed: choice, sacrifice, defiance. The captain felt it before he understood it, a subtle vibration beneath his throne, the warship whispering in a language he had not heard since his ascension. His crest flared uneasily, Systems are behaving irregularly. An officer reported, ancient subsystems active without command authorization. In the chamber, the lights shifted, patterns emerging along the walls, symbols the princess recognized from half-forgotten myths. Her breath caught. This was older than royal law, older than captains and councils. She whispered a name under her breath, a word spoken only in temples sealed for millennia. Elias saw the change too, his sensors lighting up with readings that made no tactical sense. Energy flows bending inward, as if the ship were turning its gaze upon itself. "What's happening?" he asked, for the first time uncertainty edging his voice. The captain did not answer immediately because fear had finally found him. "The warship's core," he said slowly, "it judges moments of existential divergence. It was meant to prevent collapse, not enforce punishment. It has not awakened in recorded history." The implication hung heavy. This was no longer just about a prisoner or a pilot. The ship itself was deciding whether the law it carried still served its purpose. The princess felt a pull, not physical but profound, as if something ancient recognized her presence, her lineage, her refusal. She remembered the stories now, of bloodlines tied to the founding of the alliance, of queens who carried not just authority, but balance. She had always thought herself insignificant beside such legends. Now the walls themselves seemed to hum her name. Elias felt suddenly small, a single human surrounded by forces far beyond him. And yet he did not regret his choice. If this was how it ended, he would face it standing. The core's voice did not speak aloud, but its decision rippled through the ship, systems stabilizing, weapons standing down not by order, but by necessity. The execution protocol dissolved like mist. The captain stared at the chamber feed, at the princess alive and unbroken, at the human still defiant, and understood that whatever happened next would redefine destiny, not just hers, but the alliance itself. And the tension did not break, it deepened, because now the question was no longer whether she would die, but what the galaxy would become if she lived. The warship's lights dimmed all at once, not to darkness, but to something closer to reverence, as if the vessel itself were bowing to an unseen presence. The hum of engines softened, weapons retracted into their housings, and across the bridge every officer froze, caught between terror and awe. The ancient core did not speak with sound, yet its will pressed through every system, every wall, every living mind aboard. Memories not their own flooded the ship, visions of the Alliance's birth, of wars so brutal they had nearly erased intelligent life from the stars, of desperate architects who had built law into metal and code because they no longer trusted flesh to choose wisely. The princess staggered as knowledge brushed her thoughts, her breath hitching as fragments of forgotten truth surfaced. The law that condemned her was never meant to be eternal. It was a scaffold, a temporary structure built during an age of extinction, meant to be dismantled once survival was secured, but generations had mistaken it for destiny. She fell to her knees, overwhelmed, hands pressed to the floor as if grounding herself against the flood. Tears streamed down her face not from fear, but from grief, because her people had lived chained to a past they no longer remembered, enforcing cruelty long after necessity had faded. On the bridge, the captain felt something shatter inside him, pride, certainty, the unshakable belief that obedience equaled righteousness. The core's memory showed him the truth. Captains were never meant to claim lives as reward. The void was meant for traitors who endangered survival, not women who dared to choose their own fate. His claws trembled. This revelation was treasonous to everything he had taught, everything he had enforced, and yet it felt undeniable, like waking from a long and brutal dream. Elias felt the shift as well, though the memories were not meant for him. His sensor stabilized, his fighter no longer threatened, but he sensed the gravity of the moment, the kind of turning point humans wrote histories about in blood and regret. Then the twist struck like a blade. The core identified the princess not merely as condemned royalty, but as a living key. Her bloodline carried dormant authority encoded at the Alliance's founding. Authority designed to awaken the core and revise law when conditions were met. She was never meant to be sacrificed. She was meant to decide when sacrifice should end. The revelation rippled outward, stunning the bridge crew into silence. The captain's voice broke as he whispered the words, "Revision authority confirmed." The princess looked up. Slowly, disbelief warring with dawning horror. All her life she had been told her duty was obedience, marriage, alliance through submission, never choice, never judgment. and now the universe placed the weight of countless worlds on her trembling shoulders. "I don't want this," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I never wanted power, I just wanted to live." The core did not care for desire, only balance, but something within its ancient logic hesitated, influenced perhaps by the human presence, by defiance framed not as rebellion but as protection. Elias spoke softly, almost to himself. "Power doesn't ask what you want, it asks what you'll do with it." The captain turned toward the execution chamber, his posture no longer commanding, but humbled. "Princess," he said, voice stripped of authority, "the law you broke no longer binds you, but what you choose now will bind us all." The weight of that truth crushed down on her chest. She could condemn the captain, dismantle centuries of hierarchy, ignite civil war across systems where obedience was the only structure holding peace together, or she could preserve the law and accept her own death as a stabilizing sacrifice. The core waited. Outside the warship, distant fleets began to stir. Sensing the anomaly, commanders demanding explanations, alliances teetering on the edge of fracture. The galaxy was listening even if it did not yet understand. The princess stood slowly, legs unsteady but spirit blazing. She walked to the transparent barrier and placed her hand against it, meeting Elias's gaze across impossible distance. He had given her this moment, whether he knew it or not. "I will not choose death to preserve a lie," she said, voice gaining strength, "but I will not burn the stars for revenge either." Her words echoed through the ship, through the core, through history itself. She chose amendment. The core surged with light, law matrices rewriting in cascading waves, execution protocols erased, captain privileges redefined, consent encoded as immutable, binding across all allied species. On the bridge, officers cried out as systems changed beneath them. Ranks dissolved, authority redistributed. The captain fell to one knee, not in punishment, but in acceptance. Elias felt tears blur his vision. He laughed once, breathless and disbelieving, because somehow a single refusal had rewritten an empire. But the twist was not finished. The core flagged a consequence. Law revision triggered dormant threat response. Ancient enemy beacons awakening beyond known space. Forces that had once been held at bay by fear of rigid law now sensed vulnerability. Peace had been chosen, but war was coming. The princess lifted her head, tears drying, fear hardening into resolve. "Then let it come," she said quietly. "If destiny demands a battle, we will face it with choice, not chains." And across the warship, across the stars, fate shifted its course, not away from conflict, but toward something far more dangerous, a future where survival would depend not on obedience, but on courage. The moment the law rewrote itself, the galaxy answered, not with applause or relief, but with movement, cold and vast and terrifying in its scale. Ancient beacons long silent flared awake beyond charted space, their signals crawling across the void like waking predators sensing weakened prey. The core's final warning echoed through every deck: threat containment failure, external response imminent. On the bridge, chaos erupted, officers shouting over one another as star maps bloomed with red anomalies. Fleets emerging from hyperspace corridors that had not been used since the Alliance's founding wars. Civilizations once crushed into submission now testing the strength of a galaxy that had dared to change its rules. The captain rose from his knees slowly, no longer a tyrant, but not yet forgiven. His voice rang out, sharp and urgent. "All hands, battle readiness. This is no longer an internal matter. The Alliance itself is under threat." Elias felt his fighter systems update in real time, new access codes unlocking, human authorization protocols integrating with alien command nets. His breath caught as he realized what that meant. The law had not only spared the princess, it had elevated him from defiant pilot to sanctioned protector, a symbol whether he wanted it or not. In the chamber, the princess steadied herself as the ship trembled, the weight of her choice pressing heavier now that consequences screamed back. She felt the pull of distant minds, ancient forces probing the edges of the core's awareness. These were not mere raiders or opportunists. They were survivors of extinction wars, species that had learned to fear the Alliance's rigid law because it had once been unstoppable. Now that law had softened, and predators always tested softness. The core transmitted images directly into her thoughts, worlds burning in past ages, not as warnings, but as context. The law had been forged to scare these enemies into retreat, not to defeat them, and now the illusion of absolute control had shattered. Elias keyed his comms, voice steady but edged with adrenaline. "Tell me where you need me," his human instincts kicking in, danger clarifying purpose. The captain looked toward the chamber feed, then back to tactical displays. He swallowed his pride. "Human pilot, you will escort the princess to the command deck. The Corps recognizes her as strategic authority. If the galaxy is to follow this new law, they must see her stand, not hide." The order sent a ripple of disbelief through the bridge, but no one argued. Reality had shifted too far for old hierarchies to hold. In the chamber, the force field dissolved, and for the first time since her arrest, the princess stepped freely onto the deck plating. The ship seemed to adjust around her, lights warming subtly, gravity steadying, as if acknowledging her presence not as prisoner, but as anchor. Elias brought his fighter in close, docking clamps engaging with a heavy thud. The hatch opened to sterile air and unfamiliar architecture. When he stepped inside, armored and human and very small among towering alien officers, silence followed him. Some gazes burned with resentment, others with something close to hope. Their eyes met again, closer now. The princess saw exhaustion etched into his face, fear held tightly in check, and something fierce beneath it. She inclined her head in a gesture of gratitude older than words. He returned it awkwardly, unaccustomed to reverence. Alarms blared, sharper now. Incoming fleet detected, hostile vector confirmed. The main display shifted to show colossal silhouettes emerging from the dark, organic and mechanical fused into nightmare forms. Ships designed not for diplomacy, but annihilation. The ancient enemies had come, drawn by change, hungry to test it. The captain barked orders, formations deployed, shields raised. But everyone on the bridge knew the truth. The Alliance fleets were vast, but divided, shaken by internal upheaval. Commanders across sectors hesitated, uncertain whether to obey revised law or cling to the old one. The princess stepped forward, her voice carrying through the chaos, clear and unwavering. "This is the consequence of choice," she said. "We can retreat into fear and rebuild chains, or we can stand together and prove that freedom does not make us weak." Her words broadcast automatically, the Corps amplifying them across Alliance channels. To admirals, governors, soldiers, and citizens, her image filling countless screens, not as a victim, but as a leader born in crisis. Elias felt something ignite in his chest as human fleets responded first, confirmations flashing across the display. Earth-aligned warships altering course. Human soldiers had always understood fighting uphill battles, especially when ideals were on the line. One by one, other species followed, some reluctantly, some with fierce relief, choosing unity over nostalgia. The enemy fleet advanced, weapons glowing with energies banned by ancient treaties. The first volleys tore through defensive lines, explosions blooming like violent stars. The warship shuddered as impacts rattled its shields. The Alliance was bleeding already. Elias launched again, his fighter streaking into the chaos. A human spear aimed at the heart of an ancient nightmare. He felt no certainty of survival, only purpose. On the bridge, the princess gripped the rail, fear clawing at her resolve as she watched lives vanish in fire. This was the price of her choice, and she refused to look away. The Corps whispered one final truth into her mind. Survival is no longer guaranteed by law, only by will. She lifted her chin, eyes burning. "Then we will endure by will," she answered. Across the stars, battle raged, empires collided, and the galaxy learned that changing destiny did not avoid war. It simply changed what the war was fought for. The battle consumed the stars, fire and shadow tearing at one another in slow, violent arcs, ships dying in silence and light, entire squadrons vanishing in blinding flares, and through it all the warship pressed forward like a wounded titan refusing to fall. Elias flew as if the void itself were alive beneath his hands, instincts screaming, training fading into muscle memory and something deeper, human stubbornness sharpened into resolve, enemy vessels twisted and folded under impossible geometries, ancient weapons clawing at reality. Each pass he made felt like flying through the mouth of a god. On the command deck, the princess stood unmoving, knuckles white against the railing. Her eyes tracked the battle not as numbers or symbols but as lives. Each loss hit her like a physical blow. Every order she allowed the captain to issue carried the weight of consequence. She felt the truth of leadership settling into her bones. Power was not command. It was responsibility that never slept. The captain fought with everything he had left, voice hoarse, issuing commands that once would have been unquestioned, now layered with explanation and choice, and yet the crew followed him more fiercely than ever before, because he no longer hid behind law, he stood exposed with them. The ancient enemy adapted quickly, their ships shifting forms mid-battle, learning alliance tactics in real time. Shields that had held for millennia buckled, entire defensive lines shattered, panic rippled through outer fleets, retreat signals flashing. The alliance teetered on the brink of collapse. The core pulsed uneasily, probability curves bending toward extinction. It had calculated millions of futures and none ended cleanly. Not with the enemy this close, not with unity this fragile. The princess closed her eyes briefly, breathing through fear, then spoke, not loudly, but with certainty. Redirect civilian corridors, prioritize evacuation over territory. We save lives first. An officer hesitated. Worlds would be lost, resources abandoned, centuries of expansion erased. The captain turned to her, searching her face. She met his gaze without flinching. Empires can be rebuilt, the dead cannot. The order went out. Across the galaxy, billions felt it. Fleets pulling back to shield transports, soldiers fighting delaying actions knowing their sacrifice bought survival not glory. The alliance was bleeding ground, but preserving its soul. Elias heard the evacuation channels open, saw civilian convoys streaming through fractured space, and felt a fierce pride twist in his chest. This was not the cold efficiency of ancient law. This was something messier and braver. Then the enemy struck at the heart. A massive entity emerged from folded space, larger than any vessel yet encountered, a command organism. Its presence distorted sensors and minds alike. Alliance ships faltered as targeting systems failed. Pilots screamed as gravity twisted. Whole formations collapsed into chaos. The Corps' assessment was immediate and brutal. Existential threat confirmed. Probability of Alliance survival below threshold. The princess staggered as the Corps shared the truth with her. Images of futures where the enemy consumed system after system. Where her choice became the first step toward extinction. Despair surged, sharp and suffocating. Elias felt it too. The sudden hopelessness that crept into comms. The subtle shift from determination to dread. Human voices tightened. Alien voices wavered. He made his decision without asking. He angled his fighter toward the colossal entity, engines screaming as he pushed them beyond safe limits. His comm channel opened to the bridge, voice steady, "Princess, that thing is coordinating the entire enemy force. If it goes down, we might buy time." Silence answered him, heavy and terrified. "You will not survive," the captain said quietly. Elias smiled faintly, fingers tightening. "Then make it count." The princess felt her heart fracture. She stepped forward instinctively. "Stop him," she whispered, to the Corps, to anyone, everyone. The Corps hesitated, logic screaming sacrifice, something new whispering restraint. Elias' craft streaked forward, a single human flame racing toward a cosmic nightmare. Enemy fire tore at him, shields failing, hull rupturing, alarms blaring, pain flared white-hot, but he held course. The princess reached out with her mind, not knowing if it was possible, not caring if it was forbidden. She felt the Corps respond, felt pathways open, ancient permissions bending. "Wait," she said aloud, voice breaking, not to the Corps, but to Elias. "You didn't choose this fate so I could watch you die." Something changed. The Corps flooded Elias' systems with power, raw and unstable, warnings cascading. His fighter transformed into a burning spear of light, tearing through enemy defenses. He screamed as forces threatened to tear him apart, but he did not slow. The massive entity reacted too late. Elias slammed into its core, releasing everything, not as an explosion, but as collapse, space folding inward, the enemy command organism imploding, its psychic grip snapping across the battlefield. The shockwave ripped through both fleets, ships spinning, systems failing, silence rushing in behind the roar. On the bridge, the princess dropped to her knees, sobbing, eyes locked on the fading light where Elias had been. Her chest ached with unbearable loss. She had chosen life, and now life demanded payment. Then a signal flickered. Weak, fragmented, human. The core spoke softly, probability altered. Elias' voice crackled through static, breath ragged but alive. Told you to make it count, he said. Hope detonated across the bridge, raw and overwhelming, and as enemy ships faltered without coordination, retreat signals ignited across their fleet. The galaxy had not been saved yet, but it had been given something just as dangerous. Hope born from choice, carried on human stubbornness, and sealed by a princess who refused to let destiny decide alone. The battlefield did not end with triumph, it ended with silence, the kind that settles after storms too large for celebration. Wreckage drifted like fallen constellations, fires burned without sound, and across the stars fleets regrouped, battered but alive. The enemy retreated into the dark beyond known space, wounded but not destroyed, a promise of future conflict lingering like a scar. Yet for the first time since the Alliance was born, survival had not been purchased with chains. On the bridge of the warship, medics rushed forward as Elias was pulled from the remains of his craft, armor scorched, body shaking with exhaustion and pain, but breathing, unmistakably breathing. The sight of him drew a collective release of tension so powerful it felt like gravity lifting. The princess stood frozen for a heartbeat, then moved, no attendants, no guards, just her, crossing the deck with unsteady steps until she reached him. Her hands hovered before touching his arm as if afraid he might vanish if she did. You broke the universe for me, she whispered, voice trembling. Elias managed a weak smile. Guess it needed breaking, he said, then winced as medics scolded him, but his eyes never left hers. The captain watched the scene quietly, something like humility etched into his posture. The warship felt different now, lighter, as if ancient weight had finally been set down. In the days that followed, the galaxy struggled to understand what had happened. Councils convened in emergency session. Worlds argued. Some raged, some rejoiced. Entire cultures reeled as laws older than memory were rewritten overnight, not by conquest, but by refusal. There were riots on worlds where obedience had been sacred, celebrations on others where hope had been outlawed for generations. The alliance fractured and reformed in the same breath, chaos and possibility intertwined. At the center of it all stood the princess, no longer condemned, no longer hidden. She addressed the galaxy not from a throne, but from the bridge of the warship that had nearly killed her. Her voice carried across stars. I was told my fate was obedience or death, she said, and I chose neither. I chose responsibility. Freedom does not mean safety. It means facing danger without surrendering our humanity. Her words were not perfect, not polished, but they were real and worlds listened. The core, ancient and watchful, recalculated endlessly, its purpose evolving. It no longer enforced destiny. It guarded possibility. The architects who had built it long ago had feared choice, but even they had left a door open, waiting for someone brave enough to walk through. Elias recovered slowly, stubbornly, refusing sedation longer than necessary. Humans healed with time and irritation. When he finally stood unaided, the crew of the warship watched him with something close to reverence, the human who had stared down law and lived. One quiet cycle later, he stood beside the princess at the viewport, stars stretching endlessly before them. The void no longer felt like a grave. Do you regret it? He asked softly, breaking the silence. She considered the question, thinking of the lives lost, the wars yet to come, the fragile future balanced on choice instead of certainty. No, she said at last, I regret the centuries we waited to choose. Beyond them, fleets realigned under new charters, consent encoded into treaties. Commanders now answered not just to rank, but to conscience. It was slower, messier, and far more dangerous than obedience, but it was alive. The captain submitted his resignation days later, not in disgrace, but in acceptance. A new generation would lead, shaped not by fear of law, but respect for choice. As for the princess, she refused the crown offered to her, instead becoming something unprecedented. A living arbiter between species, not ruler by blood, but guardian by will. Destiny had tried to use her as payment. She had turned it into purpose. And Elias, human soldier, pilot, rule breaker, became legend without seeking it. His name spoken on worlds where humans had never set foot, a reminder that sometimes the smallest craft could block the largest void. Years later, when the ancient enemy tested the borders again, They did not find a galaxy bound by fear. They found one bound by choice, fractured but united, scarred but defiant. History would argue whether that moment saved the galaxy or doomed it to endless struggle. But the people living in its wake knew the truth. For the first time, their fate was their own. And somewhere between stars and scars, between law and love, a princess who refused to die and a human who refused to obey stood together, watching a future that was no longer written for them. It was written by them. Rookstar.